as the FBI is rounding up Japanese nationals, here in Washington, they're also engaging in this policy, including the owners of proprietors of many dry cleaning operations. And for a time, Washington men could not get their suits and shirts until these Japanese Americans, these Japanese were released so that they could reopen their establishments so men in Washington could get their shirts and ties. More seriously for the Japanese is that this was, anybody who's a civil libertarian is going to be appalled at what happened to the Japanese in this country. In 1924, over the objections of Calvin Coolidge, Congress passed a law that prevented Japanese from becoming American citizens. And it was even open to question whether or not a Japanese child, or a child born to Japanese parents in this country was considered a naturalized American. That was even open to question. Japanese newspapers were routinely shut down. Japanese banks were seized. Japanese Americans are arrested in New York. They're arrested in Washington. They're arrested in Alabama. They're arrested out on the West Coast. Quarantines are put around them in Los Angeles and San Francisco, where there are fishing communities that were dominated by Japanese in Los Angeles Harbor and San Francisco Bay. But we also start rounding up and arresting German Americans and Italian Americans, not in the numbers that we did with Japanese Americans, but they too were rounded up for questioning, and some detained and some imprisoned, as we now know. And Robert Morgenthau, who is the Secretary of the Treasury, comes out of a meeting with FDR the night of December 7th and immediately announces a ban on most Japanese commerce. We close the borders. Japanese cannot enter the country. They can't leave the country. They can't get on a ship to leave the country. They can't get on a commercial airplane. Many trains are told that if you have a Japanese individual on your plane, to notify the conductors are told to not notify the nearest FBI office. And this is nationwide. Of course, on December 6th, this is an isolationist country. Polling showed, Gallup polling showed, the overwhelming majority of Americans did not want to go into the European war, did not want to get into what we didn't call it World War II. We didn't refer to World War I as World War I. That was simply the Great War. We referred to this as the emergency or the war effort, but it was not called World War II. One of the leaders of the America First movement was, of course, Charles Aviator, the famous Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator who had crossed the Atlantic alone several years before. He, along with other Americans, prominent Americans from the left and the right, with Lowell Thomas, Herbert Hoover, Alf Landon, there were many people who were part of the America First movement, both liberals and conservatives, who did not want America to go into the war. Lindbergh has given many prominent speeches in the Midwest and around the country, tearing into Roosevelt, advocating staying out of the European conflict. As of December 7th, he goes into hiding on Martha's Vineyard, he and his family and his wife. He refuses to take phone calls. He refuses to answer reporters' telegrams. The America First movement disappears within moments after December 7th, 1941. They were so strong, they were so muscular that they had announced on December 5th that they were going to participate in every congressional election in the country. They were going to open up offices, and they were going to have a hand in making sure that the candidates who ran for Congress in 1942 were isolationists.